Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Shavi's Pedig Vav Halacha Gimel. We're going to be learning today Daf Mem Tes. We left off on Daf Mem Ches Amud Beis in the last line of the Amud, right in the beginning of the Gemara. The big rule that we learned in the Mishnah was that we say, we are learning about Shvius, that Gidulin Mivatlin Eso Ikar, which means the Mishnah gave a case, as we explained, that you have an onion that was planted and picked on the 6th year. So it's an onion of the 6th, but you left it on the ground, and it's possible that it's going to derive nourishment from the ground, and there will be some extra growth in its leaves. And the question is, what will be the status of the entire onion? So the chiddush of the Mishnah is that even though the onion is of the 6th, and all you have on the 7th is additional gidulim, when we can ascertain that those gidulim took their nourishment from the ground, as the Tanakama says, because the leaves, the new leaves, are very green, are dark green. So the entire onion is classified as a 7th-year onion. It's only a little bit of an extra growth. Gidulin are mevatlin ho'ikr. Now, the last line in the Mishnah is Keneged Kain Moitzoi Shvius Mutarin. And as we explained it at the end of yesterday's share, that let's go with the Hemshech, the same onion, 6th, that was also put on the ground and it grew on the 7th. And now, if it also grew on the 8th, so the Mishnah is telling you that just like the Gidulin were Mavaklin, the Iker, and it became, even though it was originally a 6th, it became a 7th. If, again, there was an additional growth on the 8th, so that additional growth of the 8th will again be mevatel the ikr, and now the whole onion will be classified as a 8th-year onion. That is the pshat in the Mishnah. However, what we will learn today is that really there's a machlokes amoraim, and we'll see between who and who. The Rabbi is of the opinion that even if the onion is an onion of the 7th year, and you plucked it on the 7th, and you put it on the ground, and the additional gedulin that are very green came on the 8th, says Rab Ze'eda that if the gedulin that grew on the 8th is in quantity more than everything that was there up until the 8th, so now you have roiv of the 8th, even though it began on the 7th, we will say Gidulin Mevatlin Eso Iker Lekula, and it's now going to be classified as an 8th-year onion. And that will be the big topic of today. And it's a very, very important daf for people that are familiar with the dinim of Bittul, Lach Balach, Yavish B'Yavish. The Iker of today will be the rule of Davar Sheyesh Lo Matirin versus Davar She'ein Lo Matirin, which means that when you have an item, let's say, for which there is no remedy, the prohibition will always be there. There is where we do say the dinim of Bittul. By davar sheyesh lo matirin, as we'll learn, different reasons why the item which is now prohibited might become permitted, might become remedied. Either it's just a time factor, right? Like a chadash, after the korban ha'omen is brought, or after the 16th of Nisan, it's going to become mutar b'derech memela. Or we're having something that's tevel, for example. Tevel could be tithed. So there is an action that could be taken. It doesn't have to be taken, but it's something that could become permissible without subjecting it to the rules of bittul. The Chachamim say that davar sheyesh lo matirin will never become batel. So we're going to get into that whole topic, and we're going to bring it back. And this topic will both be a problem on the Amoraim that argue with Rab Ze'eda, that say that the last line in the Mishnah has to be exactly the way we explained it, 6th, 7th, 8th, because if it's planted on the 7th, it grew on the 7th, even though there was Gedulim on the 8th, even if the Gedulim on the 8th is Roiv, it will never be Mevatel the Iker, versus Rab Ze'eda that holds that in the case that I just mentioned, there will be Mevatel the Iker. We're going to get off. We're going to apply, by the way, the dinim of Gedulim Mevatel and Iker. We're going to see how that applies for Trumas or Meiseres. We're going to learn, God willing, at the end of today's daf, a Mishnah that tells us about the Gidule Truma. That means if someone has Truma, and instead of eating it as Truma, they planted it. Midoiraisa, especially if it's something that its seed deteriorates. When you put it in the ground, whatever it was is no longer. Whatever comes out is brand new. The Chachamim made a gzeira that Gedulei Truma must always remain Truma. We'll speak to reasons for that. Geduleim are chulin, and again, all of this will be related to our machlekes of how to understand the last line in the Mishnah. Is it only when it's 6th, 7th, 8th, or if there's a time where if you planted the onion on the 7th and it's of the 7th and then it grew a little bit more on the 8th, if the roiv of the onion currently is now from the 8th, one shita holds that is mevatel the ikar, even though the ikar grew on Shvi'is. Okay, so let's begin on Daf Mem Ches Amud Beis. So first of all, we have to clarify, the Gemara clarifies to learn Pshat in the Mishnah, the way we explained it when we learned the Mishnah inside, according to the Tanakama, not Rabbi Chanina ben Antignois. Like, how do you even know that the additional growth came from the nourishment of the ground? Maybe it came from the air. So Keini Masnisa, the right way of learning the Mishnah is that if the leaves are shchoiden, and shchoiden cannot mean black, because if shchoiden were to mean black leaves is a sign that the leaves completely are moldy. It's the opposite. Black leaves is because there was no nourishment coming from anywhere. They're getting old. Shchoiden means that they're very dark green. Very dark green is a proof that they got their nourishment from the ground. And again, the chiddush of the reisha of the Mishnah is that even though the ikir of the onion is of the 6th, because you picked it on the 6th, it grew on the 6th, it got readied on the 6th, you were malakit it on the 6th, but you left it on the ground, and there was additional growth. The fact that the additional growth, which normally are the leaves, are very dark green, that's a proof that it took its nourishment from the ground. And therefore, because of this new rule that we are learning, that Gidulin Mevatlin Esoikar, therefore it's classified, everything is classified as an onion of the 7th. And when the Mishnah says V'irukin or Hoiriku, V'irukin Mutarim, that's the Girs and the Gemara, V'irukin means that it's a light green. Look inside the Rashirilio on the bottom of the Amid, on the left column, 4 lines before the bottom. The Perush Yerukin here doesn't mean green. It means a very light green, a pale green. It means if the leaves become yellowish almost. Yellowish is araya, even though it grew. I want you to know that in my house, sometimes the onions in the basket, some of the leaves grow. That's what we're talking about. Those leaves will be very pale. And so even though it grew, it didn't grow from the ground. If it didn't grow from the ground, then it's not gedulim of shvius. That's where we say mutarim. Chavra daf memtes. Let's begin now today's daf. So the first thing we're learning now, very good. The first thing we're learning right now is how this rule of gedulim mevatlin ha'ikr is applicable by Trumas u'Maisris. Listen to this. Rabbi Yosei, b'shem Rabbi Yochanan. Stam on the side, many are of the opinion that in the Yerushalmi, Rabbi Yosei, b'shem Rabbi Yochanan, which means he was a Talmud of Rabbi Yochanan, is what in the Bavli he's called Rabbi Asi. It can work. So whatever, let's go with the words of it. Rabbi Yosei b'shem Rabbi Yochanan, Batzol sha'akoroi. Now again, we're not talking about shvius. We're moving the same idea for Trumas u'Maisros. You have an onion. You picked the onion. Let's say you picked it achveis on the 4th year. And you tithed it completely. You gave Truma, you gave Meiser Rishon. On the 4th year, you gave Meiser Sheni. You did everything correct. So Batzal Sha'akari means not only did you uproot it, but you fully tithed it. And now, Ushasala, you planted it again. And now it began to grow, like we learned in our Mishnah. Now it begins. You're having some black leaves, dark green leaves coming out. Once the leaves turn dark green, which means that they're getting new nourishment currently. So you would think that if you have to give new Trumas u'Maisros, it should only be on the new growth. But what Rabbi Yossi is saying, b'shem Rabbi Yochanan, that the same rule we have in the Mishnah, that Gidulin are mevatlin ha'ikar, we apply it over here. Which means that the fact that there is now a new growth, that means we look at it as if the whole onion is a new onion. And now you have to retithe it completely. Misase lefi kuloi. How gavaldik is it?
So, Rabbi, how is it different from Malacha Gimel that we learned yesterday towards the end of the Amud? It seems like it's repeating itself.
No, it's not. What do you mean?
With the green leaves, that pretty much we're saying the same thing.
Yes, we are. It's a big chiddush because the Mishnah is speaking about Shvius, and they were speaking about Trumas Umaisa.
Oh.
Exactly, we're saying the same thing by Trumas Umaisa. And that's a very big chiddush over here. Let's look inside. Look inside the top of Rashirilli on the right side. Kivan sheishchen mis asil lefi kulei. The perek hanedim in ayerik. The gebavli nadorim. Isa hachi. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak. Amar Rabbi Yechanan. Litra betzolim. Shetikna. Shetikna. That's it. It means you took off all trumas umaises. Uzera mis asheres lefi kulam. The af agav the Isra kil chasa. Even though you already took maisres off. Kivan the chazar b'shasla. Since you planted it again. Vigadla. That's the key. Not just you put it in the ground. It began to grow. Mis aseres lefikula. Afal pish kvar iseres iker. And not only that, the iker is kayim. Don't forget onions. When you plant onions, the zera, what you plant doesn't deteriorate. The ain't color. So you would say, what are you talking about? Of course, from the new growth, give trumas umaisres. No. Sarech lahafresh min hagedula umin haiker kibatchila ukiilu loitikna ma'olam. Why? Same words. Lefisha bitla gedula masa iker. Now here we have a machlokes between Rabbi Yosi b'shem Rabbi Yechanan and Rabbi Chia b'shem Rabbi Yechanan. Instead of learning in the Rashi earlier, let's learn it in the Gemara. Rabbi Chia says even more. Not only is it true, even more. Rabbi Chia b'shem Rabbi Yechanan, batzal shakaroi, same thing. You picked an onion. You gave all the maisres, and now you planted it again. Not it has to grow for there to be gedulin. For the Gedulim to say the whole thing is 0 kilometer, the whole thing is brand new. No, even if it didn't grow. If it only took root without any new growth, same idea. Because when it takes root, new sap goes into the vegetable, here the onion. The new sap is mevatel the old sap. So we look at it as if the whole thing is brand new. I would say the concept of tshuva, do you have to actually do the right thing for you to say that you are a new man? Or the fact that you are rooted in godliness, even though nothing new came out of you, that's already new. Even more. And by the way, to say to what you're saying, Chia b'shem Rabbi Yechanan is arguing that by Trumas u'Maisres we apply Gidlulim Mevatlin Ikar even more than by Shvius. By Shvius, no one says this. By Shvius, no one says this. Just because it took root. By Trumas u'Maisres we say it. Okay. So now that we made it clear that this is not unique to Shvius, it's not exactly like Shvius. Again, by Shvius there was no machlokes. But the same idea we apply to Trumas u'Maisres. Now let's come back to Shvius. And as we spoke out when we learned the Mishnah, and as we spoke out in our words of introduction, that when we have the last line in the Mishnah says that Keneged Kain, so it's not Kemoy Kain, it means Keneged Kain, Moitza'a Shvius Mutarin. So we said that our Mishnah is not talking about an onion of the 7th that was replanted for the 8th. No, our Mishnah is speaking dafka about 6th. That's really of the 6th. It only became classified as the 7th because of the rule Gidulin Mevatlin or Ikar. So even though there's just a little bit of growth on the 7th, it's called the whole thing is the 7th. Everything is subject to biur. Everything has the kedusha that you can't do business with it. However, if this onion now again was left on the field and it grew a little bit more on the 8th, that's for sure pshat in the Mishnah. So now we say that Gidulin Mevatlin or Ikar. And whatever the 7th did to the 6th, the 8th is Choyzer V'neir the 6th. Okay. What for sure the Mishnah is not talking about, for sure not, in other words, I'm just repeating what we said yesterday and we're keeping that. Today, we're adding up some new thing. You planted it on the 7th. And you plucked it on the 7th. So that's called Peiros Shvius. But you left it on your field. Now, on the 8th year, there are new green, very dark green leaves. A little amount. Normal, just a little bit. The big onion, and there were leaves already before, a little bit more leaves. we don't say gedulim mevatlin or ikr. We don't say that a little bit of green leaf will reclassify and, let's say, demote something that has kedusha to becoming choil. We don't say that. We're standing with that. But question is, what happens if it 7th, not 6th, 7th, it grew on the 7th, it was plucked on the 7th, you put it on the field, now it's the 8th, but now what grows on the 8th is so much that if you look at the whole thing right now, roiv of what you have grew on the 8th. That's the question of the Gemara. Will we say that since Ruba grew on the 8th, let's now apply the rule that Gidulin are mevatlin ha'ikar, even though it began from the 7th, but now you have roiv, or even though there's roiv, it will never become batal, because the ikir is the ikir, the root is the root, the bulb is the bulb. All that grew now is, is in addition. In addition, no, even if it's roiv in addition, it cannot be mevatal. Machlokes hamayroyim. Let's read it inside. So, v'loy shanya, there is no difference between sha'akoron b'shvi'is. Sha'akoron b'shvi'is means that it's an onion of the 6th, and you put it on the ground on the 7th, which is the case of the Reisha. And now you put it on the ground again, l'matzoi shvi'is. Therefore, sure, since the ikir grew on the 6th, so now, even though it grew on the 7th, but now that it also grew on the 8th, we're going to classify it as a non-shvi'is onion. That's for sure, which is the way we learned the Mishnah. However, will there be a case, not any case, a specific case, that even if you planted it from the beginning on the 7th, is there any time that we can say that if it grew more on the 8th, at some point, at least, let us say, Gidulim Mevatlin Eso Ikar, is there such a case? Machlokes. Rabbi Zajac says yes. But not like the Reisha. In the 6th to the 7th, all we need to classify the onion as a 7th-year onion is a little bit of new growth. The leaves turn green. That's all you need. From the 7th to the 8th, a little won't do it. However, that mekiven sheraba olav chodosh, if what grows on the 8th physically exceeds that which was there on the 7th. So now that you look at the whole thing, what you have, 51% of it grew on the 8th. Now we also say, which is also a chiddush, because don't forget, what grew new is not a new root, not a new bulb. What was remains. It grew in addition. And the logic, like we said, when it comes to the, let's say, to the animal kingdom, there's a rule. Hayotzim in atame tame. So if you were to apply that rule over here, once the onion grew on the 7th, it's a 7th-year onion. Whatever grows out of the 7th-year onion is a 7th-year onion. Says Rabbi Zajac, no. That since, and only if there's roiv, but once there's roiv, kivish rabba chadosh, muter. Muter means now it will not be classified as a 7th-year onion. All of it is classified as an 8th-year onion. That's the sheet of Rabbi Zajac. However, Rabbi Lo, which is Rabbi Ilo, or Hila, as they'll be called him, and Avimi, they argue with Rabbi Zajac, Tarvayan Omri, that even if there's roiv of the 8th over the 7th, nevertheless, it remains asur. In other words, no matter how much new growth you have on the 8th year, you can never nullify that which was already prohibited. Why? Because that which was prohibited is here. And we call that the ikir. It is the ikir. Whatever grew in addition, grew on top of it. You can't go down from shvi'is into non-shvi'is. The Mishnah says, the Mishnah says the words, again, that's only because the Mishnah is only speaking about a case that the ikir is from the 6th. All that, why did it become the 7th? Because gedulim avatlin ha'ikar, even though there was a little bit of gedulin. So oibazoit, hapesha asar, hapesha hitter. So another little bit of gedulin of the 8th can do the little bit of gedulin from the 7th. Only that is the case of the Mishnah. Okay, and now what we will have today, we're going to have a challenge against Rabbi Ro and Rav Imi. which will be the first challenge, and it's going to come from a long braisa that will be fascinating and a chazara for many people that are familiar with these dinim, especially if you learn smicha. And then we're going to have another challenge against Rab Ze'eda, which will be a bomb challenge. But let's begin. Challenge now against Rabbi Ilah and Avimi. How can you tell me that even if there's Roiv won't do bittul? Doesn't fit. Because L'chura, Masnisa here means a Baraisa appears to contradict the Shita of Rab Law and Avimi. Tony, we learned in a Baraisa, Zajac klal. Shahoy Rabbi Shimon Omer Mishum Rabbi Yoshua. So let's begin slowly. First, we got a rule, Chevra, that called Davar Sheyesh Lematinin. Anything, any item which is now prohibited, but it could be remedied. Memtes Amad Aleph. Now, I want you to make it clear. Could be remedied either because an action could be taken, which also means the action doesn't need to be taken, but it could be taken, or the time or the circumstance will change. They are both in the same category of a davar sheyesh lematirin. And as we're coming to in a moment, davar sheyesh lematirin, only min b'minay, I'll explain that in a moment, is never going to be batal. I want you to know that this rule is a din midrabbanan. And I want to go more than that. I'll just do this by heart. There's a machlokes between Rashi and Danan. We learned this all together. Bittul is a din doiraisa. I know there are different types of bittul, but the concept of bittul is a din doiraisa. When we say something is not batul, as a rule, with exceptions, it's a derabanan. In this case, davar sheyesh lematirin. I'm just adding a wrinkle. By min b'minoi, it's never batul. Why? Rashi says, like a common sense thing. He says, why would you need to use bittul? Go fix it. What do you mean? Bittul is you have no option. But here you have an option. Like the first example will be tevel, just as an example. So you have a wheat, right? And the wheat is tevel. And the wheat fell into whatever, two wheats that are already misuken by the basic law of bittul. By the basic, it's yavish b'yavish. There's no mixture of tam. So it's batal b'roiv normally, which means if you pick out one stalk, you can say, I got it from the roiv. Yes, you could. Midoraisa, you would say that. Midrabanan, why would you say that? Go ahead. And when it comes to taking off trumas u'maisres, even though truma lechatchila should be menamukov, do it menamukov. Take another wheat and separate trumas u'maisres for this stalk, whichever one it is, and now you don't need bittul. That's Rashi. Rashi holds that Chachamim said, why should you use the tool of bittul if you can be mesak in it? Or if it's a time issue, wait until Chodesh becomes mutter. The Ran holds that min b'minoi, I want to say like this, guys, we're going to learn a shita that it's not lahalach, it's not going to be brought down today. But if you remember when we learned the whole sugya of the dam hapoid and the dam hasor, we just had this a few weeks ago in Parshas Achrei Mos, that Rabbi Yehuda holds that dam b'dam is never batal. Rabbi Yehuda holds min b'mino is not batal because he holds that bittul can only happen if there's a clash. Min b'mino means there's no clash. Clash means like and something that's different. So now one has to dominate. One has to dominate. The Torah says the majority dominates. If there's a mixture of taste, 60, 61, or 101, or 201. But if they're not clashing because they're the same, Rabbi Yehuda has this. If they're the same, they're strengthening each other. They're not nullifying each other. Davar sheyesh lematir and min b'mino of Rabbi Yehuda, the Tana Rabbi Yehuda is blood and blood. He's speaking about begashmias, two things that are alike. The Nan says, forget about gashmias for a moment. Halachic min b'minoi. Mutter is min b'minoi. Mutter and asr is min b'she'ena minoi. In other words, if something is permitted and something is prohibited, there's a clash. Davar sheyesh lematirin, since it will become mutter or it could become mutter, then view it as if it's mutter. If you are viewing it as if it's mutter, it's the same. There's no clash. And whenever there's no, even though we don't paskin like Rabbi Yehuda by dam b'dam, right, by physical equal, but the concept will be applied midrabanan by davar sheyesh lematirin. Just putting it out there, that's the machlokes. But coming back over here, it doesn't matter. Let's move on. Kegoin, what will be an example of davar sheyesh lo matirin tevel? Like we explained, tevel, wheat and wheat. You can be misak and tevel, even if you don't know which one is of tevel. Doesn't matter. You can be toidim umaaser mimakem acher, and by truma it should be min amukav. Min amukav means it has to be nearby. Bring wheat right here and be toidim it for whichever one of the three. Or if you have meiser sheni, you can go eat it everything in Yerushalmi. Or meiser sheni, you can be poida it. In other words, you can make it into banafai tchulin. Hegdish could be you can make a she'ela on the hegdish. Very simple. Chadash is another type of davar sheyesh lematirin, because chadash is not something that through an action you can make it permissible. No, you don't even have to do an action. You have to wait time. Okay. So here, the Chachamim said that there is no shiur after which you say, there was 60 against 1, now it's going to become nullified. No matter how much mutter is more than the asur that will become mutter, no, it always remains asur. But that would be an incomplete statement, because the emes is that even by a davar sheyesh lematirin, we differentiate between min b'minoi, min b'she'eno minoi. That's where most people forget. Most people remember, I know, a davar chashav is not batel, a davar shebeminyan is not batel, davar sheyesh lematirin is not batel. But when you learn smicha, you have to chazer, you got to get a bit more details. And elo nervous then, hold on, min b'minoi b'kolshu. That's important. Which means it will never be batel. Even by a davar sheyesh lematirin, it's min b'she'ena minoi. Min b'she'ena minoi. I give you a good example. You have wheat and barley, and you turn them into flour, and you're going to make bread. The concept of bittul, of tam, that if the wheat, let's just say, is so little, because generally the ratio that takes away the tam generally is 60 to 1. If there's 60 barley against 1 wheat, you won't even taste the wheat. Even by davar sheyesh lematirin, it's not here. Okay, so that's the din of davar sheyesh lematirin. Continues the Baraisa, Obed, in contrast, chol davar she'ein lematirin. What will be an example of davar she'ein lematirin? For example, truma. Truma is truma. Chala is chala. Arla is arla. Kalayim. There is a shir. Nosnu lehem chachamim shir. And what will that be? Min b'minoi. It's amazing. He's not giving you the shir. You know why he's not giving you the shir? Because the Braisa mentioned items that do not share the same amount. Who remembers? How much do you need to be mevatel truma? 100 to 1, not 99. How much do you need to be? And by the way, chala dinoi kit truma. Chala is like truma. When it comes to arla and kilayim, you have to have 200 against 1. Generally, what do you need? You need to have 60 by nois and tam. If it's lach balach, generally, right? So meat, non-kosher, a little bit of non-kosher fell into kosher. Okay. Aber the shaloi b'minoi, but if it's min b'she'enoi minoi, it's also important. Even by truma, guys, people don't remember that. People know, by truma we just learned truma is 101. Kalayim is 200 to 1. That's only min b'minoi. By min b'she'enoi minoi, it's always b'nois and tam, which makes a lot of sense. Just like by davar sheyesh loy matirin, that's not batel. It's batel min b'she'enoi minoi, because whenever the things are mixed, it's not the example that I gave, the 3 stalks of wheat. There's no tam mixture. But whenever you grind stuff together, or if you cook things together, once the ratio is such that you won't even taste the minority, that's a different type of bittul. Even truma, when we say meduma, what's meduma? You had an apple of truma that fell into 99 apples of chulin. It's all meduma, of course, because it's min b'minoi. By the way, if an apple falls into an orange, it will never be batel. Why not? Because you can see it. Take it out. Meduma means that it's a mixture that you didn't have enough of the ratio, and therefore everything has to be treated like truma with all of the details. Everything, it's complicated. What happens? Means a mixture. You made a confusion. By min v'she'enoi minoi, even by truma, you don't need to have 100 to 1. You have to have, if there was a real mixture, if it got mixed, you cannot discern it. Lach balach, or even by flour. I give my example of flour. Flour is not lach balach, but it got mixed up all together. And when you'll make it into bread, you won't taste the wheat if there's 60 barleys to the wheat in quantity. Okay. We're not, what's the kasha? No kasha yet. Hold on. Hativain. This is a lashon in the Brais. Hare, all of this is Shitas Rab Shimon Bar Yochai. And now that he said the Zajac, came the Chachamim and they challenged him and they told him, Hare, Shvi'is, guys, haltkop. Hare she'ein lo matirin. Produce that grows on Shvi'is, let me say, guys, is prohibited forever. It's subject to biur forever. Okay? Very simple. Once the food of its kind is no longer available in the fields, you may not eat it. Right? So now, so that's called davar she'ein lo matirin. Davar she'ein lo matirin, what will be the rule right now according to Rab Shimon? Davar she'ein lo matirin. So min b'minoi, we just said, that's Rab Shimon's rule. It should be matel, whatever the ratio is, whatever the Chachamim said. By min b'she'ein minoi, no matter what, b'noi sentam. V'leinot machshir, the Chachamim say that Shvi'is is never batel. It will never be batel. Why should it not be batel? According to you, Rab Shimon, you gave a good rule. Davar she'ein lo matirin should always be batel. Why will we learn? We're going to learn this in the Mishnah soon. That if Shvi'is got mixed into other product, it will never be batel. Why? It's a davar she'ein lo matirin. Right? To which Rab Shimon answered, Daf Mem Tesam at Beis, Amar Lohem Loi. I disagree with you. Im amartem b'shvi'is. Indeed, the law in which we say that shvi'is is never going to be batel, that's exactly like we mentioned Beneged the din of biur. She'eino yeseres kolshu, only concerning the law of biur. What's the law of biur? So we already mentioned this. There's a machloikas Rambam and Ramban. We're going to learn our Gemara l'das Ramban because that's the way we paskin. The Rambam will have a whole different understanding of the sugya. What does the Ramban say? We had this before. That biur does not mean that by the zman habir you have to put it out and you have to destroy it. All you need to do is you have to declare it ownerless, and then it could be eaten. Now, who can take it back? Machloikas Tanoim. So the Rab Shimon is saying a gewaldige thing. Biur is davar sheyesh lo matirin. Why? Put it out there and be mafkir it. And after you mafkir it, it could be eaten. So enachanami, fakert. That's what Rab Shimon is telling you. Davar sheyesh lo matirin is not going to be bottle. Bin b'minai will never be bottle. It stands. So when the Mishnah says Shvi'is will never be a battle, it's only concerning the din of biur. She'eno yeseres kolshu ela for the din of biur. But what about for eating? I give you an example. What's the din of eating? You cannot destroy the food. Peter Shvi'is has kedusha. I know that there's a general issue of baltashchis. It's on a whole different level by Peter Shvi'is. Peter Shvi'is cannot be taken out of the Holy Land ever. Peter Shvi'is may never be used for commercial transactions. Well, you can't do schayda with Peter Shvi'is. For that, there is never going to be a heter. That's a davar she'ein loy matirin. And for all of those dinim, Rab Shimon is going to hold b'nois and tam. It will be batel. What level of bittul do you need for Shvi'is? Not like Truma 1 in 100, not like Ori and Kilayim. The normal rule. B'nois and tam. Beautiful. Okay. Now we have a problem. What's the problem? What is Rab Shimon saying? That avola achila, Shvi'is is a davar, chevre, she'ein loy matirin. What did we just learn right now? We just learned right now that according to Rabbi Law and according to Ravimi, Peidoi Shvius itself what is Rab Shimon saying over here? Avalachila, it can become bottle. I'm sorry, simple. It can become bottle. Push it. I went too far. So what does that prove? It could become bottle. So that's a proof to Rab Zeta. Rab Zeta is saying that if product of the 7th year, if it now on the 8th year it grew and what grew exceeded what grew before, it's bottle. Could become bottle. Rab Shimon is saying that Peidoi Shvi'is La'achila could become bottle. Is that right? That is right. Now people ask a question. Hold on. What does Rab Zeta say? How much do you need to be mavatal according to Rab Zeta? Roiv. What did Rab Shimon just say now in the Gemara in the Braisa? Aval Achila. How much do you need? Noisem tam. That's not a kasha. I'll tell you why it's not a kasha. Because when do you need to have noisem tam lach balach? But in the case of our Mishnah, it's a classic yavish biyavish, where there's no mixture of taste. You have the original onion, and now there's additional growth. When it's yavish biyavish, the din is that a simple majority is on a forbidden. So Adarabba, it looks from what Rab Shimon is saying, befedish that Peidoi Shvius is subject to bittul. That's a raya to Rab Ze'era, and that's a kasha on Rab Law and Ravimi. Beautiful. So fragti Gemara soy bazoi ma of din law Rav Hila. It's amazing how Rab Law, who we call Rab Ila, now became a tahei. Rav Hila Ravimi. So they say, whoa, you're mixing apples and oranges. And that is, when we speak about bittul, everything we learned in the Braisa, you know what we're talking about? You have one peda of Shvius. You have another peda that's from another year. And they get mixed together. You have two different items that got mixed together. What is our sugya of the Mishnah? The same onion. It's not just the same onion. That which grew out of the Iker, the new grew from the Iker. That's something else. Rab Shimon was never speaking about that. It's Enochanami that Rab Shimon is saying explicitly in the Braisa that Shvius is subject to bittul. The Mishnah says that Eno said that it's not bottle. Of course, it's not bottle because biur is davar sheyesh le'matina. That was a great chap. But coming back over here, Pastel and Ra, they will tell you that when the Braisa says clearly that Rab Shimon is saying that Shvius could become nullified, yes, that's be'eruvin. Eruvin means I have one item that's Shvius, I have another item that's not Shvius. So let's say you're making a stew, you're making a soup, and you put in 61 onions, one onion from Shvius. You put in 60 onions of not Shvius. So Rab Shimon is saying, classic, this is a davar she'ein lo matirin. The Peder Shvius is Peder Shvius. It became so nullified, that's it, it's nullified. That I get. But what are you trying to apply it to? Aval b'gidulin, our topic is a different type of bittul, because the permitted of the 8th is growing out of the prohibited. And I'll tell you more than that. It's not just growing out of it. The ikir is asur. The ikir, we're talking about the case of the machloikas, that it's a product of the 7th year. That's called the ikir. You want to tell me that the gidulim should be able to be mevatel the ikir? I'll tell you, will never be mevatel the ikir, even though there's roif. Never be batel. It's much harder to say that gidulim should be mevatel the ikir. This is gavaldik. Okay, so the question against them was knocked off, and now we're going in the opposite direction. Now we're going to bring a raya to Rabbi and Ravimi. Fakir the Amar Rab Ze'era b'shem Rabbi Yonason. Now it's going to be very ironic that we're going to bring from Rab Ze'era a proof to Ravimi and Abla. The problem is it will be a stira from Rab Ze'era to Rab Ze'era. We'll get to that in a moment, okay? But before we get to that contradiction, to Amar Rab Ze'era b'shem Rabbi Yonason. You planted an onion in a vineyard. Now it's bona fide kilei akerem. Let's take the same concept that we learned in Halacha Gimel Yakir. Sha'akara, you plucked it out, right? Kili Yakerim. And now you replanted it elsewhere. Now, theoretically, the new growth should be permitted, right? Because it did not grow in a vineyard. Sha'afilu hoisef kama, no matter how much more grew. The din is, all of it remains asur. Why? She'ein gidulei heter malim eso iser. And it doesn't matter, Roiv. So there's a raya to who? To Rablo and to Ravimi. Now, before we go on, now we have a bomb question. Who made this statement? Rab Zeira b'shem Rabbi Yonasan. So how can Rab Zeira by Shvi'is say that Roiv helps when Rab Zeira himself, he's quoting Rabbi Yonasan, he agrees with Rabbi Yonasan, holds that by Kilei HaKerem, even if Roiv of the new grew from a place where there's no vineyard, never will Gedulim be mebatal the Iker, even if it's Roiv. That's the bomb question. So look inside, before we go on, look inside the Rash Shadilyo, second line from the top in the left column, middle of a shtickle. Ve'im toimar frek the Rash, kasha the Rab Zeira ad Rab Zeira. Dila el, ka'amar Rab Zeira, mekim shiriba olav hachodosh, we're speaking about the din of Shavi'is. If what grew on the 8th is Roiv, mutter. Alma, the sfirale digidulin malana seiker umavatlin oisoi. V'hach over here, gabi klayim sovar den gidulin malana seiker. Right, gavaldik. So tiritz, here's the hand. Toditz that ha pirishula perek hanoidim in hayerek. The tiritz. So this was discussed in the Darim in Bavli, and there it's explained the following: Shvi'is and Kilei HaKerem are very different. Guys, listen to this logic. Shvi is shiny. Why? Hoyel v'isura al yidei karka. What sanctified the onion on the 7th? The land itself. The land is of the 7th year. So the land of the 7th that made it asur, the land from which the new growth came on the 8th, the land can be mevatel land. Since it was alidei karka, so therefore there is a logic to say, according to Rab Zeira, if there's roiv, that bitei losa al yidei karka, masha'en ken b'kilei hakerem. Listen to his words. The isur did not come from the land. Where did the isur come from? The isur came by the fact that there was a taroivis of the seeds. Not about the land.
But it feels like that it still doesn't matter because it wouldn't not be kalaim until it meets the land.
I know, but let's read the words. Since the ein ha'isur machmasar karka didn't come from the land, what caused the isur? Minei taroives zaroinim, from the mixture of the seed. Sho'isrim. So when you took it away from there, you don't have power against power. You have negative power and nothing. The fact that you planted it where there is no taroivis, it's nothing. It's not a positive, it's not a negative. It's just growing. Planting it away from a mixture is not the opposite of a mixture. The land of the 7th and the land of the 8th are clashing. So the land of the 8th, if it's roiv, can be mevatel the land of the 7th. The ground is not the source of the isur. Just because you replanted it, you're not removing the source of the isur. Let me add more words. When we began today's shir by Trumas Umaisris, that we had the not Rabbi Yosef Shita, the other one, right, B'Shem Rabbi Yechanan, Rabbi Chia, that by Trumas Umaisris, even if nothing else grew, the fact that new sap went into it, it reclassifies everything. I know we have to have growth and of roiv, but the once you have roiv of the 8th, that reclassifies everything. By Kilei HaKerem, we don't have the power. We have a lack of problem. A lack of a problem is not a solution. Just you don't have a problem, but it's not a solution. It's not a positive. It's just the absence. It's the absence of a mixture. Heder cannot be mevatel a problem. Something positive can be mevatel something negative. Light can take away darkness. Light takes away darkness. Nothing doesn't take away darkness. The guy says, what are you talking? Yesterday I sinned. Today I'm not sinning. No, you have to do something to take away that. It's very good. Okay. So anyways, it's not a stira Rab Zera, Adarabba, but it is, but the Gemara is using this as a raya to Rab Lo and Avimi. Now we're going to begin with a new problem. Frag the Gemara, 1 second. Now let's analyze the sheet of Rab Zera. Mas Niso, according to Mishnah, Mesachtas Truma is Pedic Tes, a Mishnah Lechoira will be contradicting the sheet of Rab Zera. The Tanina, we learned to Mesachtas Truma that, like we mentioned, that Midrabanan, this is important. This is not Midoy Raisa. This is actually one of the 18 Shmoina Asr Davar that we learned to Masechta Shabbos Babali right over there that they enacted Baaliyas Hananya ben Gorin. I'm missing a name over here. Chizkiah, Ben Chizkiah ben Gorin. One of the Shmoina Asr Davar is that if someone, whether it's a Kohen, whether it's a Yisrael, if someone planted Truma, even though Midin Torah, when the seed decomposes, which is the rule by most seeds, as we know from Chasidus, Batzel is an exception. We'll get there in a moment. Davar shezaroi kala, it disintegrates. So whatever that was is no longer. So then it should no longer have a status of truma, and what grows should be new tevel. Midrabanan, they enacted Gedule, Truma has the din of Truma. And as we learned over there, Masechta Shabbos, why did they make that takana? One is simple, that a Yisrael should not replant. No, imagine, a Yid will separate Truma. He'll say to himself, why should I give it to the Kohen? Anyways, I'm a farmer. Anyways, I have to plant who knows how many sa'ah of grains in the ground. I won't give it to him. I was misakin my tevel. I separated truma, and now I'm going to use the truma. I'll put it in the ground, and whatever grows will be again. In other words, a person will find how not to give truma to a kohen. That's gavaldik. I think Rabbi says there's another reason. Even if he gave it to the kohen, because according to this, if a kohen received it, it should not be a problem. No, because what happens if truma becomes tamei? So if truma becomes tamei, even though it's muter bahana, which is why normally they would use it for fuel, they would burn it, but you may not eat it. A kohen is going to tell himself, why should I lose it by burning it? Let me replant it. And if I replant it, it won't have a status of Truma Tameya. And what's wrong with that? What's wrong with that is that you don't always live during the planting season. And if the kohen, instead of burning his Truma, will designate the Truma in the place where he'll use for the next season to plant, someone by mistake might find that. He'll know it's Truma. They won't know it's Truma Tameya, and they'll eat it. Okay, so that's this. So they made a takana that Gedule Truma is Truma. But the takana has a limit. When do we say Gedule Truma the first time around? I took a kernel of Truma and I planted it. What grows is Truma. What happens if I took a kernel from the Gedulim? So Geduleim already is Chulin. In other words, their Gezeda did not go all the way until the end. Now, that is the Mishnah. Now the Mishnah continues in contrast to the din of Truma, Abel Tevel. I just want to classify Tevel. Why would someone even benefit from planting Tevel? What will be the Mila? Tevel. I'll tell you the big Mila. Because if you remember, the Kitzur, when you have a product prior to its Gemara Malacha, which will be the Meiruach, you can have Achilas Arai. Once you did the Meiruach, now you can't even have Achilas Arai. A person will say, I don't want to be misakin it. I want to be able to eat it arai. Let me replant it, and I'll have I know it's tevel and tevel, but it's going to be tevel before the Gemar Malacha. That will be just a reason why someone might go ahead and plant tevel. So if a person planted tevel, or if a person planted meiser rishon, right? In other words, trumas meiser was not yet separated, or if a person planted svichei shvis. Svichei shvis are plants that grew on their own on shvis that may not be eaten midrabanan. I want to say something important. We're not talking about someone who planted them on shvis. That's an isur. We're speaking about someone who took svichei shvis, which may not be eaten, and he replanted it matzah shvis on the 8th year, or trumas. Or let's go with the words meiser of chutz laaretz, which is only yasser midrabanan. Or meduma, here we go, Dan. What's the meduma? You have chulin and truma that got mixed together. If you have the ratio of 100 to 1, everything is chulin. But if you don't have that ratio, everything is called a mixture, and everything is bound or limited to some restrictions of truma. And now you want to plant that. Or if you have bikurim, so says the Mishnah, that even though the Chazal made a takana, the Shmoina Asar Davar, is that Gedule, Truma, it's only by Truma. In all of the above, Geduleim Chulin. Why Gidoleim Chulin? So that Ashadili, we have time, gives for each one a reason. Tevel, keep your finger in the Gemara and take a look at the Ashadili around 10 lines from the bottom of the left column. Why? Why are we more lenient by Tevel? So Mefarish Shasim, the Tevel Rubai Chulin. Don't forget, Roiv of Tevel is Chulin. So we're more lenient. Meiser Rishon Afal Gav the Tevel Trumas Meiser. Like we said, the problem with Trumas with Meiser Rishon was you didn't take of Trumas Meiser. Rubai Chulin. Svichei Shvi'is, since it's only us and Midrabanim, and on top of that says that she'ein mitzuyin. It's not so common. You only have that once in 7 years. Or Trumas Chutz La'aretz eino mitzuya, Hamaduma Ruba Chulin, Bikuram eino mitzuyim, Kolayim she'ein hagal b'shivas haminim. Okay, let's go back inside the Gemara. Keep your finger. You can keep your finger in the Rasharilio, but let's go back and think about it. Now, so that's called the Mishnah. Now on the Mishnah, Gidulei Chulin. However, V'tanei Allah, however, the Braisa comes and further clarifies. That what? That Tamamish Chulin, as an example, you planted Tevel, even though it was after the Gemar Melacha, even though you were not allowed to eat it, Achilas Arai. Now that the new stuff grows, now you can eat it Achilas Arai. Whatever was is no longer. You begin from zero. That's only B'davar Shezarei Kala. Only if it's a type of plant that its seed decomposes to go from the yesh to the new yesh, there has to be a ayin be'emsa, which is normally the rule. However, aval b'davar, when there's the exception, which is b'davar she'ein zarei kala, for example, luf, for example, garlic, for example, onions, this is the exceptions. There, when you plant them, they do not decompose. Whatever was remains, even by the items even by tevel, even by svichei shvis, even chulei v'chulei, aval b'davar she'ein zarei kala. Not only are the gedulim asur, even the gedulim are asurim. Because since it does not decompose, whatever grows is simply a hemshech of that which was. This is a blatant contradiction to Rab Zeira. Rab Zeira holds one of the items she'ein zarei kala is a butzel. What are we saying? That giduleim are asur. Giduleim is roiv. Clearly against Rab Zeira, who says that if the roiv grew on the 8th year, then the gidulim is mevatel the ikar. Bam. Answers the Gemara, Dafnun. Haha. It's good we started early. So frag the Gemara ma of Rab Zeira, he'll have a way out. Pasar law. B'kedusha shvi'is bebiur, mamish the way we had in the beginning of today's shir. That, guys, biur is called a davar sheyesh le'matirin. Fits. Why? Because we're following those Rishonim who learn, and that it's so much harder to the others, that you have a restriction that is resolvable. Okay, the Zman of biur came, put it out there, declare it hefker. Davar sheyesh lematirin is never batel. So when the Braisa says that afilu giduleim is arson, means it's subject to the dinam of biur. When Rab Zeira was giving his shita today, he was not talking about biur. He was saying it's considered the product of the 8th. Beneged dinei achila. Aval achila, he stands his ground. Since shvius is never matirin, it's a davar she'ein lamatirin. Faker, davar she'ein lamatirin is batal. True, a little bit. We don't say gidulam batal ikir by a little bit. That's only from the 6th and to the 7th. L'chumra, l'kedusha, not in the other direction. But once you have roiv, aval achila, kivin shel aval achadash, muter, l'chayim, gavaldik. From now it's easy street. This was a beautiful daf.